arguing vigorously that it was on that day that getting a job for Ms. Lewinsky suddenly became a matter of high priority for the President and hence for Mr. Jordan. Why is that so? Well, again, I'll let the majority counsel for the Judiciary Committee tell you in his own words during his closing argument. And again, you should have this before you if you can't see the chart. But why the sudden interest? Why the total change in focus and effort? Nobody but Betty Curry really cared about helping Ms. Lewinsky throughout November, even after the President learned that her name was on the prospective witness list. Did something happen to move the job search from a low to a high priority on that day? Oh yes, something happened. On the morning of December 11th, 1997, Judge Susan Weber Wright ordered that Paula Jones was entitled to information regarding any state or federal employee with whom the President had sexual relations or proposed or sought to have sexual relations. To keep Monica on the team was now of critical importance. Remember, they already knew that she was on the witness list, although nobody bothered to tell her. And that same thing was picked up last week by Mr. Manager Hutchinson, both in his recitation of the events of that day and in the exhibits he showed you. And if I'm lucky, we will put up on the easel to my right the exhibit that Manager Hutchinson used. You'll see the order that this exhibit places on the critical events of November and December, the November 5th meeting, the November no job search action, President receives the witness list, and then of special interest, December 11th, first event, Judge Wright's order permitting questions about Lewinsky. 2, on December 11th, the President and Jordan talk about a job for Monica. And now, let me ask you to focus on what Mr. Hutchinson told you about the events of December 11th. Sounding somewhat like majority counsel, he asks, and so what triggered? Let's look at the chain of events. The judge, the witness list came in, the judge's order came in, that triggered the President into action, and the President triggered Vernon Jordan into action. And that chain reaction here is what moved the job search along. Remember what else happened on that day, December 11th again? That was the same day that Judge Wright ruled that the questions about other relationships could be asked by the Jones attorneys. Now, it appears to me that the managers are suggesting, again with not a great deal of subtlety, that Vernon Jordan, one of this country's great lawyers and great citizens, was prepared to perjure himself to save the President. So let's just imagine the manager's examination of Mr. Jordan in this chamber that would let you make your own judgment about his truthfulness. Question. Mr. Jordan, isn't it a fact that you met with Ms. Lewinsky on December 11th to help get her a job? Answer, yes. Question. And isn't it a fact that before and after you met with her, you made calls to potential employers in New York? Yes. And isn't it true that the reason for all this activity on December 11th was that Judge Wright had on that very day issued an order authorizing the Jones lawyers to depose certain women like Ms. Lewinsky? No. Question. What do you mean no? Isn't it true that the judge had issued her order before you met with Ms. Lewinsky and before you made the calls? Answer. I had no knowledge of any such order. The fact that Ms. Lewinsky was a potential witness had nothing to do with my helping her. I'd made an appointment to see her 3 days earlier. Question. Well, isn't it a fact that Judge Wright filed her order on December 11th before you met with Ms. Lewinsky? Well, actually, no. Let me show you the official report of the judge's discussion with the lawyers in the Jones case on that date. And you have this before you as well. A conference call between the judge and the lawyers, which is memorialized in a formal document prepared by her clerk and on file in the case in Arkansas, notes that the conference call began at 5:33 p.m. Central Standard Time. If I have my calculations right, that's 6:33 p.m. in Washington. Now I want to stop here for just a second so you know where Mr. Jordan was when that happened. Can we see the next chart? By the way, this is Mr. Jordan testifying again, I was actually on a plane for Amsterdam by the time the judge issued her order. So he testified in the grand jury. I left on United Flight 946 at 5:55 from Dulles Airport and landed at Amsterdam the next morning. Can we go back, Mike, to the previous one? So the conference call begins at 6:33 Eastern Standard Time. And the court takes up another variety of matters, and the judge didn't even tell the lawyers that she was going to issue an order on their motion to compel these various depositions until the very end of the call, around 7:45 Eastern Standard Time, and that the clerk would actually fax them a copy at that point. And so to return to Mr. Jordan's mythical testimony. And so to summarize, let me show you something that tells you what the real sequence of events was on December 11th. Vernon Jordan makes a possible job call at 9:45, another at 12:49, another at 1:07. He meets with Ms. Lewinsky from 1:15 to 1:45. He gets on his plane at 5:55 in the afternoon, and an hour or so later, the lawyers are informed that the judge had issued her order. In fact, just as a little fillip, the president's out of town and returns to Washington on 1:10 a.m., and actually Judge Wright's order is filed not on the 11th, but on the 12th. Question. Oh, I see. Well, never mind. Now, do you think, does any of you think, that you need to look Mr. Jordan in the eye and hear his tone of voice to understand that the prosecutors have got it wrong and have had, at least since the majority counsel's closing argument? Now, you will also learn from us, but not from the managers, that Mr. Jordan placed no pressure on any company to give Ms. Lewinsky a job. Indeed, two of the companies he called didn't even offer her a job. And just as the managers dramatically misstate the record relating to Mr. Jordan's efforts to help Ms. Lewinsky find a job, so too do they invent a non-existent link between the call Mr. Jordan made ultimately to Mr. Perlman, the CEO of McAndrews and Forbes, Revlon's parent, and the offer Ms. Lewinsky finally received from Revlon with her signing of the affidavit in the Jones case. We will demonstrate, beyond any question, once again, the conclusions the managers have drawn are simply false. Begin with the fact that both Mr. Jordan and Ms. Lewinsky have testified that there was no such link between the job and the affidavit. And the only person to ever suggest such a link was, once again, Ms. Tripp. Now, I presume that it is not the manager's intention to suggest that we bring Ms. Tripp before you to explore her motivations from making that suggestion. Next, take Ms. Lewinsky's interview with the McAndrews official, which she described as having gone poorly, a characterization adopted by the managers for obvious reasons, because it suggests that there was a desire on their part to heighten the supposed relevance of the call that Mr. Jordan made to Mr. Perlman. In other words, under their theory, Ms. Lewinsky's job prospects at McAndrews and Forbes, or at Revlon, were kaput until Vernon Jordan made the call and resurrected her chances. Unfortunately, like so much of the obstruction case, the facts do not bear out this convenient theory. In fact, the man who interviewed Ms. Lewinsky at McAndrews was impressed with her, and because there was nothing available in his area, sent her resume to Revlon, where she was hired by someone who did not know about Mr. Jordan's call to Mr. Perlman. And so much for obstruction by job search. That then is an overview of the charges contained in these articles. You'll hear about them in greater detail than I could offer you today when my colleagues speak in the next 2 days. But I want to bring my presentation to you to a close. We are not here to defend William Clinton, the man. He, like all of us, will find his judges elsewhere. We are here to defend William Clinton, the President of the United States, for whom you are the only judges. You are free to criticize him, to find his personal conduct distasteful, but ask whether this is the moment when, for the first time in our history, the actions of a president have so put at risk the government the framers created that there is only one solution. You must find not merely that removal is an acceptable option, that we will be okay the day after you vote. You must find that it's the only solution, that our democracy should not be made to sustain 2 more years of this president's service. You must put that question because the one thing that our form of government cannot abide is the notion that impeachment is merely one more weapon the Congress can use in the contest between the legislative and executive branches. Let me be very clear. We do not believe that President Clinton committed any of the offenses charged by the managers. And for the reasons we'll set out at length over the next 2 days, we believe the managers have misstated the record, have constructed their case out of tenuous extrapolations without foundation, have at every turn assumed the worst without the evidence to support their speculations. You put these lawyers in a courtroom and they win 10 times out of 10. But suppose we're wrong. Suppose that you find that the president committed one or more of the offenses that the managers have charged. Then there remains only one issue before you. Whatever your feelings may be about William Clinton, the man, or William Clinton, the political ally or opponent, or William Clinton, the father and the husband, ask only this: should William Clinton, the president, be removed from office? Are we at that horrific moment in our history when our union can be preserved only by taking the step that the framers saw as a last resort? Now, I'm never certain how to respond when an advocate on the other side of a case calls up images of patriots over the centuries who sacrificed themselves to preserve our democracy. I have no personal experience with war. I've only visited Normandy as a tourist. But I do know this. My father was on Omaha Beach 55 years ago. And I know how he would feel if he were today. He didn't fight. No one fought for one side of this case or the other. He fought, as all those did, for our country, our Constitution. And as long as each of us, manager, President's counsel, senator, does his or her constitutional duty, those who fought for their country